They laughed. They rolled their eyes. Some even walked away mid-sentence. Not because your words lacked sense, but because your truth threatened their comfort. And isn't that always the way of the world? Chosen one. When the divine gives you vision sharp, unshakable, undeniable vision, it rarely comes wrapped in applause. No, more often, it comes dressed in silence, rejection, and ridicule. They shunned your voice not because you were wrong, but because your insight revealed what they were desperate to avoid. You saw it all unfolding long before it arrived. You could feel it brewing in the air like an invisible storm, could hear it whispering through the stillness of everyday life. Others were busy scrolling, sleeping, gossiping, but not you. You were listening, watching, awakening. You spoke your truth, maybe gently at first, maybe with urgency later. But every time you tried to hold up the mirror, they turned their heads, and then it happened. Just like you felt it would. Just like your soul was trying to prepare them for. And suddenly, the room grew quiet. The same voices that once mocked your warnings started echoing your words. The very people who called you dramatic or delusional are now scrambling to make sense of what you had already made peace with. This moment, this quiet confirmation, you've been waiting for it. Haven't you? Not for revenge, not to gloat, but because part of you needed to know you weren't crazy, that what you carried wasn't a curse, but a calling, that the visions you received were not just fleeting thoughts, but divine downloads. Yes, chosen one. Your spirit has always been tuned to a higher frequency, and that's what made you hard to hear. You weren't speaking nonsense. You were speaking tomorrow. And that frightened people who were still holding on to yesterday. You see, there's a certain loneliness in being ahead of your time, in knowing something so deep and so clear, only to be met with blank stares. It's like shouting into the wind, hoping someone hears the echo. But you didn't stop. Even when they laughed, even when they tried to shut you down. Because deep down, you understood it wasn't really you they rejected. It was the truth inside you. The light, the alignment, the assignment. And that light, it disrupted their shadows. Your presence alone made people uncomfortable. Not because you did anything wrong, but because you reminded them of what they were ignoring. You forced them to feel the tension between who they pretend to be and who they were born to become. But pretending is easier than awakening. So they labeled you, criticized you, left you out of the room, out of the circle, out of the plan. They didn't want a prophet. They wanted peace, and not the divine kind. They wanted the illusion of peace, the surface-level kind that avoids hard truths and silences inconvenient voices. But peace built on denial always comes crashing down. And when it does, the echo of your voice becomes impossible to ignore. It's happening now, isn't it? The very things you warned about are becoming their reality. The economic collapse, the spiritual unrest, the betrayals, the shifting tides, the breaking of old systems, all of it. You felt it in your bones before there were headlines. And now that it's knocking at their door, they don't have the tools to cope. But you do. You're not panicked. You're prepared. Why? Because you were never relying on the world's systems to begin with. You've been walking by spirit, not by sight. Guided not by trends or titles, but by truth. You've lived in the wilderness while they feasted in the city. But now, the city is burning, and the wilderness has become a sanctuary. What once felt like exile now feels like elevation. This is the divine reversal. They thought your silence meant surrender. They thought your solitude meant shame. But what they couldn't see was that God was hiding you, guarding you, growing you. While they sought approval, you sought alignment. While they built their houses on sand, you dug deep and built on rock. And now the flood is here, and only one foundation is holding. Chosen one, understand this. Your vision was not in vain. It had to be rejected. It had to be dismissed. Because that was the only way they could face the consequences of ignoring divine truth. Some lessons cannot be taught, they must be lived. And now, as the veil lifts, as reality steps in like a harsh wind through an open window, they're finally beginning to understand. They're remembering your words, your warnings, your wisdom, and more than that, they're remembering you. But here's the question. What will you do with this moment? Because this isn't just about being right. It's not about payback. It's about purpose. You didn't come here to win arguments. You came to awaken souls. You didn't walk through fire just to say, I told you so. You walked through fire so you could lead others through the smoke. So stand tall now, not in ego, but in embodiment. You are not here for applause. You are here for alignment. You are not here to be seen. You are here to see, to reveal, to restore. And the very ones who shunned your vision are now seeking your voice. Not all of them will admit it. Some will try to take your wisdom and pass it off as their own. Some will circle back quietly, hoping you don't mention the way they once walked away. Let them, because your reward was never their approval. It was your clarity, your courage, your connection to something higher than their understanding. So breathe deep. Chosen one, you were never alone in your knowing. Heaven was always listening, even when they weren't. And now, reality has caught up to your vision. The tables have turned. The truth has spoken. And you're just getting started. The gift of foresight is a heavy crown, isn't it? It looks noble from afar, admirable, even divine. But only you know the weight it carries. Only you understand the loneliness tucked beneath its golden shine. Because to see what others cannot, to feel what others deny, is both a blessing and a burden. You didn't ask for this vision. It was entrusted to you. There were moments when you wished you could unsee, unfeel, unknow. Moments when the burden felt too great for one soul to carry. But you couldn't switch it off. You couldn't go back to sleep. Once the veil was lifted, there was no closing your eyes to the truth. And that's what makes you different. Chosen one. Not just your gifts, but your courage to live awakened in a world that thrives on illusions. People think the gift of foresight is about fortune-telling or predicting random events. But you know better. It's not about predicting. It's about perceiving on a soul level. It's the ability to feel what's coming in your spirit long before it manifests in the physical. To walk into a room and sense what's unseen. To hear someone speak and know what's not being said. To dream of something symbolic and watch it unfold months later in real life. That's not coincidence. That's confirmation, and you've experienced it over and over. You've woken up from dreams shaking because the message was too loud to ignore. You've walked away from people everyone else adored because something inside you said this isn't right. And you've spoken truths that made people uncomfortable, not to shame them, but to set them free. You felt the tension when you said it, the way their faces changed, the way they suddenly grew distant. But you said it anyway, because your vision isn't for entertainment, it's for divine instruction. And let's be real, that's a hard assignment. It would be easier to stay quiet, to go along with the crowd, to pretend you don't feel the shift when the energy in the room changes, to fake ignorance when you already know the outcome. But that's not who you are. That's not what you were built for. You were built for truth, for clarity, for divine disruption. And yes, that means you will walk alone at times. That means your circle will shrink. That means people will mislabel you, misunderstand you, misrepresent you. But you know what's worse than all of that, being disobedient to the call. Ignoring what heaven placed in your spirit just to make others comfortable. That's a price you're no longer willing to pay. So you carry this crown, not with pride, but with purpose. Do you remember the story of Joseph the dreamer? The one who saw visions of the future and dared to speak them out loud. His own brothers couldn't handle it. His vision triggered their insecurity. They didn't just doubt him, they sold him. They threw him into a pit and faked his death. Not because he was evil, but because his gift was too real for their fragile egos. Sound familiar? People will always attack what they don't understand. And more often than not, the attack is rooted in fear. Your insight, your discernment, your ability to speak what others only sense in shadows, it exposes things they're not ready to confront. So they push you away. They call you too intense, too deep, too much. But all of that just means too real for their denial. Joseph's vision didn't make sense at first. But eventually, it was the very thing that saved nations. The same people who betrayed him. They had to come back hungry, broken, desperate for help. And Joseph, he was prepared. Because foresight didn't just give him vision, it gave him time. Time to prepare. Time to grow. Time to transform. Just like you've been doing, while others were busy partying. You were praying. While they were chasing clout, you were cultivating wisdom. They thought you were behind, but you were being prepared in silence. Your crown was being forged in fire. And now, as the storm approaches, it's clear you are not the one in crisis they are. But chosen one, let me tell you something sacred. Your foresight is not a weapon. It's a tool, and how you use it now matters more than ever. This is not the time for bitterness. This is the time for boldness. Not the time to say, I told you so, but to say, I'm still here, if you're ready. Because that's what true leaders do. That's what light bearers do. They don't just predict the storm, they build the ark. They don't just name the problem, they embody the solution. You've always felt ahead, out of place, like you were living in a future no one else could see. That wasn't madness. That was mantle. You were carrying a sacred blueprint, one that couldn't be explained in earthly language. That's why your path felt strange, why your relationships felt hollow, why your soul yearned for something deeper, richer, realer. You weren't crazy. You were chosen. And while others mocked, you prepared. You listened. You grew. You stayed rooted in truth, even when it made you the outcast. And now, the very gifts they dismissed are becoming the tools they need. The very warnings they mocked are becoming their reality. But here's the beauty of divine design. What they laughed at will now lead them. Because real vision always outlives ridicule. So keep wearing your crown. Chosen one? Yes, it's heavy. Yes, it's lonely. But it fits you. And it was made for such a time as this. Let them see what divine foresight looks like, not just in words, but in your life. Let your peace be proof. Let your strength be confirmation. Let your grace be the final word. They may not have listened then, but they're watching now. And your next move, it's about to speak louder than anything you ever said. Your vision was too bright for their eyes. Let that sink in for a moment. It wasn't that your vision was wrong, or even unclear. It was simply too radiant for those who had grown accustomed to darkness. You weren't rejected because you were off track. You were rejected because you were on a different track. A divine track. One that required sensitivity to spirit, strength in solitude, and a clarity of sight that most people aren't ready for. You were speaking from a mountain while they were still asleep in the valley. You tried to call down what you saw, to translate heaven's language into human words. But they squinted at your light, called it strange, and turned away. Not because your message lacked truth, but because it demanded a level of self-awareness they weren't ready to face. Chosen one, your brightness was a mirror, and mirrors are confronting, especially when someone isn't ready to see themselves. The truth you carried didn't stroke egos. It didn't flatter, didn't sugarcoat, didn't play small. It illuminated. And when you shine a light into someone's hidden corners, it creates a choice: either clean house or shut the blinds. Most people choose the blinds. Most people choose to stay safe in the shadows, where they can protect their illusions and pretend everything's fine. But you were never built to be fine. You were built to be free. You were built to carry the kind of truth that cracks chains, the kind of clarity that shakes false foundations. And while that truth liberates, it also offends. It disrupts. It makes people uncomfortable, and not everyone can handle that. That's why they shunned your vision. Not because it wasn't divine, but because it was. They labeled you arrogant when you were simply confident. They called you too deep when you were finally just being authentic. They rolled their eyes when you spoke up. Not because they didn't hear you, but because they did. And your words stirred something in them they weren't ready to confront. You didn't fit in because you were never meant to. You didn't come to blend in with the scenery, you came to change it. And change is always met with resistance, especially spiritual change. Especially when it doesn't arrive with credentials or come wrapped in worldly status. You carried a frequency, a spiritual vibration that clashed with counterfeit harmony. Your presence revealed what was off, even before you opened your mouth. That's why you felt the shift in rooms. That's why people grew tense around you. Not because you were negative, but because your alignment exposed their distortion, and deep down, you sensed it. You felt that weird mix of admiration and envy. The way people praised you in public but distanced themselves in private. They didn't know what to do with someone who couldn't be manipulated, couldn't be bought, couldn't be silenced. So they turned their discomfort into criticism. But let's be honest, they weren't rejecting you. They were rejecting what you represented, a different way of seeing, a higher way of being, a vision that required them to level up, and not everyone wants to do the work that transformation demands. Still, that rejection hurt, didn't it? Because you weren't trying to shine on them. You were trying to shine for them. You weren't showing off, you were showing the way. You weren't speaking from ego, you were speaking from assignment. But because your light was unfamiliar, they misread your intention. It's the same thing that happened to Noah. Can you imagine how many times Noah was laughed at while building that ark day after day, hammering, sawing, preaching while the skies remained clear? They thought he was out of his mind, a fool, an extremist. But Noah wasn't building based on what he saw. He was building based on what he knew, based on what he heard in his spirit, based on a divine download that made no sense to the world around him, until it did, and when the rain finally came. Those who mocked him suddenly wished they had listened, wished they had honored the crazy vision. But by then, the door was shut. Not out of punishment, but because preparation has a window. And those who don't heed the calls often miss the covering. You've lived this, haven't you? You tried to build something sacred while everyone else was partying in the illusion. You warned. You reached. You even tried to dim your light to make it more palatable, but it never worked. And eventually, you learned your vision wasn't for everyone. Your light wasn't meant to be dimmed. It was meant to shine fully, even if it meant standing alone. Because light doesn't compromise with darkness. It overcomes it. And chosen one, that's exactly what you've been doing. You didn't let rejection define you. You didn't let the side eyes and whispers stop your building. You kept going, quietly, faithfully, with tears in your eyes and fire in your spirit. You stayed on the wall. You stayed in the secret place. You stayed in alignment. And now, the rain has come. Reality is matching your revelation. The things they said would never happen are happening. The systems they trusted are shaking. The people they idolized are crumbling. And the ark you built, your foundation, your discernment, your discipline is the only thing standing. They see it now. Maybe not out loud. Maybe not with apologies. But in their eyes, in their energy, in their sudden silence, they see. And that's enough. Because your confirmation was never supposed to come from their mouth. It was always supposed to come from God. And now it has. So keep shining, even when it stings their eyes. Keep building, even when they don't understand the blueprint. Keep speaking, even if your voice shakes. You were never meant to blend in with the blind. You were meant to lead with vision, and those who once called you crazy will one day call you wise. Now, word count 187. They chose comfort over clarity. Chosen one. And that's the truth you've been carrying in your heart, like a quiet ache, wondering why, wondering how, trying to understand how people could look truth in the face and still turn away. But that's the nature of the world we live in. People crave safety more than they crave transformation. They'd rather wrap themselves in a beautiful lie than unravel in the presence of a liberating truth. You didn't force it on them. You weren't trying to control their lives. All you wanted was to help them see what you were seeing, what you were feeling, what you knew. But the moment you began to shine that divine flashlight into the dark corners of their illusions, the defense mechanisms went up. You could see it in their eyes, the panic. Not because you were wrong, but because you were right. And they weren't ready. You threatened the foundation of their comfort zone. And let's face it, comfort zones are seductive. They promise safety, predictability, a sense of control. But what they never tell you is that they also become prisons, illusions that lull the soul to sleep. You knocked on the bars and said, "Hey, there's more outside of this." But they'd grown so used to their cages. They mistook your key for a weapon. It wasn't malice. It was fear. You uncovered what they tried so hard to hide. Not with judgment, but with love. But even love, when it reveals, can feel like confrontation to those not ready to face themselves. And when you introduce that kind of clarity, it stripped away their excuses. That's what truth does. It doesn't just free you. It demands something of you. It requires action, accountability, awakening. And not everyone wants that. Some people would rather keep patching the cracks in the dam than admit the flood is coming. They don't want to know that the job is draining their soul, that the relationship is toxic, that the friends they call loyal are secretly envious, that the mask they've been wearing no longer fits the shape of their becoming. You pointed those things out, gently, sincerely, but that light was just too raw, too real. So they turned on you instead, because it's easier to attack the messenger than accept the message. They didn't want to see the truth because seeing it meant changing. And changing meant letting go of control. And letting go of control meant surrendering to something bigger than their ego. You were asking them to evolve. And that's a terrifying request for someone who's still clinging to comfort. And here's the irony: they'll say you changed, that you're not the same, that you're acting different. And the truth is, they're right. You did change. You are different. But not because you became fake. You became free. And your freedom made them uncomfortable, because when you stop performing, when you stop dimming your voice to maintain the peace, when you start honoring your intuition, your vision, your divine knowing you stop matching their dysfunction. And that rupture, it forces them to choose. Either rise with you or reject you. And most chose the latter. It stings. It's confusing. It makes you question your own heart. But I want you to know this with every fiber of your being. Your clarity was not cruelty. It was compassion. Speaking the truth in love is still love, even if they don't receive it that way. And here's something deeper to consider. You were triggering their awakening. You were like an alarm clock in a room full of dreamers, loud, inconvenient, unwelcome, but necessary. The initial reaction to an alarm is usually irritation. People want to press snooze, roll over, block the sound. But eventually, that alarm becomes the very thing that helps them rise. You've been that alarm for so many. And now, as life begins to unfold exactly as you foresaw, as the facades crumble and the comfort zones collapse, they're waking up. Slowly, staggeringly. And when they look around, they'll realize you weren't trying to scare them. You were trying to prepare them. But here's the question I know is echoing in your soul. Why didn't they believe me? Why did they make me the villain? Because, chosen one, when someone's identity is built on illusion, your truth feels like destruction. To accept what you said, they would have to dismantle who they thought they were. That's not a small thing. That's not easy. That's soul surgery. And many aren't ready for that kind of healing. So instead of asking you for more light, they cursed your fire. But don't dim it. Please, don't dim it. You weren't meant to play small in a world drowning in denial. You were meant to speak, to shine, to shake the foundations, not to destroy them, but to rebuild them stronger, truer, and rooted in something divine. Your truth is not too much. Your insight is not too early. Your clarity is not cruelty. It's calling. It's the voice of the remnant, the cry of the seer, the sacred echo of those chosen not for comfort, but for purpose. And even now, especially now that purpose is unfolding, they may not say it, but they're remembering the words you spoke, the tears you shed, the warnings you whispered. And somewhere inside, they know you weren't trying to hurt them. You were trying to help them. You loved them enough to risk being hated. That's not weakness. That's warriorhood. So keep walking in clarity. Keep shining. Keep loving, even if it's from a distance. Because while they chose comfort then, many of them are beginning to crave the clarity you always had. They're waking up, and when they do, they'll need your light more than ever. And you, chosen one, you'll be ready. You are set apart, not set aside. That's one of the most misunderstood truths in your entire journey. Because when they left you out, when the calls stopped, when the invitations dried up, when they chose others and overlooked you, it felt like rejection. It looked like abandonment. It sounded like failure. But spiritually, it was none of those things. It was a divine separation, holy, strategic, and necessary. You see, the world interpreted your isolation as a sign of weakness. But in heaven's language, it was consecration. When God marks someone for a sacred assignment, the first thing he often does is pull them away, not to punish, but to prepare, not to banish, but to build. You were hidden, not forgotten. You were being sanctified, not sidelined. Your path required fewer distractions, deeper silence, and stronger roots. That's why everything in your life felt stripped for a season. Why friendships that once felt solid began to shake. Why family ties began to feel foreign. Why the spotlight never seemed to land on you the way it did on others, even when you knew your heart was pure and your intentions true. Because your stage wasn't ready yet, and neither were they. God needed time to strip away the noise, the approval addiction, the craving for validation, the old belief systems that told you had to earn love, earn worth, earn visibility. He had to take you into the wilderness, away from the crowds, so you could finally hear him clearly. It's what he did with Moses. Remember that Moses, raised in Pharaoh's palace, groomed in luxury and influence, destined to be a ruler. But when the call came on his life, God didn't crown him there. He removed him, took him into the desert. 40 years of obscurity, 40 years of tending sheep in silence, from palaces to pastures. Not because Moses wasn't worthy, but because he was chosen. And chosen ones don't get shortcuts. They get sanctification. You, too, were placed in a desert, not always literal, but emotional, spiritual, relational. That space where everything feels dry, quiet, lonely, where prayers feel unanswered, where purpose feels vague, and where you wonder if you were ever really called at all. But the desert wasn't a death sentence. It was a womb, a cocoon, a sacred space where the divine forged your resilience, sharpened your discernment, and healed your heart. Because when your calling is high, your preparation must be deep. You weren't overlooked, chosen one. You were overprepared, and I know that hurts sometimes, especially when you see people skipping steps, being promoted without preparation, elevated without integrity, cheered on for copying what you've been doing in silence for years. It's maddening, confusing. You wonder, did I miss something? But no, you didn't miss anything. You were being matured. Your roots were going deeper so that your reach could go higher. Set apart, not set aside. That's why certain people couldn't walk with you. Not because you weren't lovable, but because your journey required purity. Your assignment demanded pruning. God saw what you couldn't. He saw the jealousy in their heart, the secret resentment, the hidden sabotage. And because you didn't, he removed them before they could delay your destiny. It was protection, not punishment. And some of those people, they were good, at least on the surface. But they weren't aligned. They didn't resonate with your frequency. They weren't willing to grow at the pace your soul was expanding. They wanted the old version of you, the version who played small, dimmed your voice, second-guessed your worth. And when you began to rise, even in quiet ways, they felt it and backed away. Let them walk. Let them misunderstand. Let them write their own narrative about you. Because your validation never came from them. It came from God. And what He sets apart, He also establishes. Look around. The signs are there. You're no longer desperate to be understood. You're no longer shrinking to fit into places you've outgrown. You're no longer chasing connection because connection now finds you. That's the shift. That's the result of being set apart. You stop chasing and start attracting. You stop performing and start aligning. And now, something powerful is happening. The very people who distanced themselves when you were growing are beginning to notice what's blooming. They sense your peace, your clarity, your energy. Even if they don't say it, they feel it. Your frequency is rising, and it's undeniable. You're walking in a new level of grace, and it's not loud. It's evident. But here's where your wisdom must kick in. Not everyone who comes back deserves a seat at the table. Some people will try to return, not because they value your vision, but because they see the fruit. They see your glow, your influence, your stability, and they want to taste what they didn't help grow. Be kind, yes. Be loving, always. But be discerning. Because elevation demands boundaries. Not out of pride, but out of stewardship. You are the temple now. And not everyone can enter the Holy of Holies. Being set apart doesn't mean you're better than others. It means you were called to walk a different path. A sacred path. One paved with fire. Yes, but also with favor. One where you carry what others cannot see and withstand what others cannot handle. And that's why the journey felt heavier, harder, lonelier, but also holier. Because through all the loneliness, you learned how to walk with God. You learned how to depend on something higher than human applause. You learned how to pray, not just from need, but from intimacy. And now, that depth has become your anchor, your sanctuary, your superpower. Chosen one, you were never forgotten. You were being formed. And now, as the season shifts, as doors open, as your name begins to be whispered in rooms you've never stepped foot in, remember this: you didn't get here because of strategy. You got here because of sanctification, because you said yes in the dark when no one was watching, because you trusted the process when it made no sense, because you allowed yourself to be set apart, not knowing when or if the fruit would ever show. But now it is, and it's only just beginning. The fall of false confidence is never quiet. It comes crashing in like thunder, sudden, jarring, and undeniable. And chosen one, you've lived long enough to see it unfold right before your eyes. The same voices that dismissed your vision with smug certainty are now whispering doubts into the same spaces where they once boasted pride. You can feel it. You can see it. The unraveling has begun. And the irony, it's not personal, it's prophetic, because what they called confidence was never rooted in truth. It was built on consensus, on trends, on the illusion of control. It was loud, sure, but hollow. Their boldness didn't come from alignment. It came from numbers, from groupthink, from the safety of the crowd. But when the wind shifted, when reality began to mirror the very warnings you carried, they didn't have the depth to stand. False confidence is always loudest before it breaks. You try to tell them, not to scare, not to shame, but to prepare. But you see, when people stand on shaky foundations, they don't want anyone pointing to the cracks. They'd rather paint over them, decorate them, post filtered pictures and hashtags over them. But paint doesn't make the walls stronger, it only delays the collapse. And now, that collapse is here. The job that seemed so secure, gone. The friendships they bragged about, fractured. The mask of having it all together, slipping fast. And while you feel no joy in their downfall, there's a deep, holy knowing rising in your spirit. I wasn't crazy. I was just early. You saw it. You felt it. And because of that, you prepared. While they were laughing, you were listening. While they were flaunting, you were fasting. While they were building image, you were building character. And character, chosen one, doesn't collapse under pressure. It gets stronger. This is what sets you apart. Because your confidence isn't based on external validation. Your clarity isn't contingent on how many people agree with you. Your power doesn't come from popularity, it comes from purpose. That's why you didn't break when the winds came. That's why you didn't run when the room grew cold. Because your foundation wasn't the world, it was the Word. The Spirit. The divine blueprint etched into your soul. Do you remember the story of the wise and foolish builders? One built his house on sand, quick, easy, impressive on the outside. The other built on rock, slow, quiet, hidden beneath the surface. But when the storm came, and it always comes, it wasn't the appearance that saved them. It was the foundation. One stood, one fell. And that parable wasn't just about buildings. Chosen one, it was about people. You built on rock, they built on sand. And that's not judgment. That's just reality. Spiritual reality. They were confident in what was seen. You were grounded in what was unseen. And now, the unseen is being revealed for what it truly is: stronger, deeper, more resilient. It's funny how quickly things shift when truth finally pierces illusion. Suddenly, the same ones who once called you paranoid are now echoing your words. The ones who called you a pessimist are now asking for advice. The ones who dismissed your warnings are now replaying your sentences in their minds. Not out of guilt, but out of necessity. Because now they see what you saw. Now they feel what you felt. And more than anything, they need what you've cultivated. But here's where your heart is tested. Because when false confidence falls, humility must rise. Not just in them, but in you. You'll be tempted to distance yourself, to say, "See, I told you." But your calling is higher than that. You weren't raised to be a spectator of suffering. You were refined to be a restorer of souls. This is the moment your integrity becomes your legacy. They may not apologize. They may not ever say the words you secretly hope to hear. But their presence, their posture, their quiet repentance, it's enough. Don't wait for an apology to walk in your assignment. Don't pause your purpose for someone else's guilt. Move forward. With grace. With strength. With a quiet confidence that comes from knowing I did what I was called to do. And now, the harvest is here. You can feel it in your bones. The atmosphere is changing. The silence that once surrounded you is now pregnant with possibility. You're not waiting for doors anymore. You are the door. You're not asking to be seen. You're shining without permission, because your confidence was forged in fire, and the fire didn't burn you, it branded you. It marked you with wisdom, with discernment, with unshakable clarity. That's what separates you from the rest. You didn't crumble. You conquered. Not through revenge, not through performance, but through alignment. And now you walk into rooms differently, not with ego, not with arrogance, but with an awareness that says, I know who I am. I know what I carry. I know what I've survived. And that awareness shifts atmospheres. It's not loud, but it's undeniable. So, chosen one, don't shrink back now. This is the moment you were prepared for. The fall of false confidence wasn't your vindication, it was your confirmation. That everything you knew, everything you endured, everything you carried was never for nothing. Let their collapse be their catalyst. Let their awakening be your affirmation, and let your steady presence, your peace in chaos, your glow in darkness be the final proof that vision rooted in spirit always outlasts illusion rooted in ego. They built fast, you built true, and now you rise. You were never called to be popular, you were called to be prophetic. Let that settle deep in your spirit, chosen one, because too many have confused purpose with popularity and favor with fame. But the truth is, the more in tune you are with the divine, the more out of step you'll be with the crowd. And that's not failure, that's confirmation. You weren't placed here to please the masses. You were placed here to disturb the comfortable and comfort the disturbed. And sometimes, that looks like being misunderstood, misquoted, misjudged. Because prophetic voices rarely get recognition in their own hometowns. You've probably felt it sitting in rooms where people admire the artificial while ignoring your authenticity. Spaces where everyone's nodding at surface-level talk. But the moment you speak truth that challenges the illusion, silence, shifted energy, quick glances, uneasy smiles, and yet you keep showing up, not to fit in, but to stand firm. Because there's something inside you that won't let you dilute the truth, even when it costs you connection. That's because your soul was branded for something higher. You carry a fire that can't be tamed, a message that can't be silenced. And even when your voice shakes, even when your hands tremble, you still speak. You still show up. You still shine. Because your assignment is heavier than your emotions. Your mission is greater than your comfort. And no, you weren't chosen for the spotlight. You were chosen for the signal, for the alarm, for the vibration that disrupts slumber and calls people into awakening. Think of Elijah. He wasn't a celebrity. He wasn't surrounded by praise. In fact, after speaking a word that shook the nation, he had to run, hide, wait. He sat under a tree, weary, wondering if his life had any meaning at all. And yet, in that very place of despair, God ministered to him not with noise, not with fire, but with a whisper, a still, small voice That's how heaven confirms its prophets, not through popularity, but through presence. You've heard that whisper too, haven't you? In the dark nights, in the tears no one saw, in the moments you wanted to give up, walk away, go silent. That quiet reassurance. You're not crazy. You're not alone. You're on assignment. And even now, as the world starts to echo the things you once said in solitude, that confirmation gets louder. Not because the crowd suddenly changed, but because the time has come. The seeds you planted in pain are beginning to bloom in purpose. Chosen one, people don't realize what it costs to carry a message. They see the glow, but not the grief. They see the insight, but not the isolation. They hear the word, but don't feel the weight. And that's okay. You weren't made for their approval. You were made for divine alignment. And with that alignment comes friction, because light doesn't walk into a room and ask for permission. It simply shines. And when it does, it makes shadows squirm. It reveals what's hidden. It demands response. That's why your presence alone shifts things. Why people either draw close or pull away. It's not you, it's the energy you carry, the truth you embody, the vibration of someone who's been refined by fire and still chose to love. You are called to be light in a world addicted to comfort, to be oil in a generation obsessed with friction, to be a trumpet in a time of silence. And yes, that makes you different. They don't understand why you're quiet when they're loud, or bold when they're cautious. They don't get your sensitivity, your discernment, your constant sense of urgency for things unseen. But that's because they weren't handed your scroll. They don't carry your mantle. They haven't been through what you've survived. You're not here to entertain, you're here to awaken. And awakening is rarely welcomed with open arms. It often starts with resistance, then silence, then imitation. And let's be real, some of the same people who once dismissed you are now echoing your language, reposting your insights, mirroring your movements. They may not credit you, but you see it. You feel it. And that's okay, because your reward was never in being quoted. It was in being obedient. You weren't here to be liked. You were here to be light, and now, that light is undeniable. Not because you shouted louder, but because you stood longer. Because you refused to bend when the wind blew. Because you stayed true to your calling, even when it felt like a curse. But chosen one, hear me, it was never a curse. It was always a covenant. The pressure you felt, it was proof of your capacity. The rejection, redirection, the silence, sacred. You weren't being ignored. You were being insulated, covered, prepared. And now, as the veils fall and the world begins to tremble under its own false weight, you are rising not as a celebrity, but as a carrier of truth, of healing, of alignment. And while others chase attention, you carry authority, spiritual authority. The kind that doesn't need a platform to shift the atmosphere. The kind that walks into a space and causes demons to tremble without a word. Because you're not just chosen, you're charged. So hold your head high. not in arrogance, but in assurance. You are not here by accident. You are not alone, and you are not for everyone, because you weren't made for everyone. You were made for the remnant, and the remnant, they're listening now, not to your words, but to your life, because your life is a prophecy. Your path is a sermon, and your presence, even in silence, still speaks. Now they see it, but you already knew. You've carried this knowing for so long that it became part of your spiritual DNA. Not a thought, not a theory, but a quiet inner certainty that pulsed beneath your skin. Long before they noticed the shifts, the cracks, the unraveling, you were awake, alert, prepared. And while they now scramble for clarity, looking for the map, you are the map. You've been walking this path in the dark, guided not by what makes sense, but by what resonates in your soul. And now, chosen one, the world is finally catching up to your frequency. There's something deeply bittersweet about this moment, because on one hand, it validates everything you endured: the silence, the rejection, the isolation, the mocking, the inner wrestle. You feel the undeniable truth rising like smoke from a fire that's been burning beneath the surface for years. I was right. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't overreacting. But on the other hand, it stirs something tender, because you never wanted to be right for the sake of ego. You wanted to be heard. You wanted to help. You wanted to shield others from the pain you saw coming. Your heart wasn't positioned above them, it was for them. And the moment they turned away, it wounded you far deeper than they realized. Now they're looking back, some with questions, some with regret, some with humility, and some silently, with a kind of reverence they once withheld. They may not say the words. They may never admit how wrong they were. But their eyes tell the story. Their energy is different now, because truth has a way of speaking louder than anything we could ever say. You've entered a new chapter now, one where your presence no longer needs to prove anything. Your life is the evidence, the fruit you carry, the peace you embody. The clarity you exude. It all speaks of someone who listened when no one else would, someone who followed the whisper instead of the crowd, someone who sacrificed comfort for calling. And this chosen one is your divine reward confirmation without needing recognition, because you didn't build for applause. You built for alignment. You didn't speak to be praised. You spoke because you had to. Because the fire shut up in your bones wouldn't let you stay silent. Because your soul made a vow before you were ever born to carry the truth. No matter the cost, and the cost was high. Let's not pretend it wasn't. You've wept over friendships that never healed. Felt the sting of being the only one who seemed to care. You've had to grieve people who are still alive, not because they died, but because they stopped showing up for who you really are. And yet, you never stopped showing up for them. Not out of weakness, but because love is stronger than resentment. And now that the tables have turned, you don't need revenge. You need reverence. For the process, for the pain, for the divine timing that revealed all things. They see it now, but you already knew. You knew when you were praying behind closed doors while they mocked. You knew when you stayed silent while they talked over you. You knew when you forgave what others said you should never forget. You knew when you chose the path of the Spirit instead of the path of applause. And now the truth is undeniable, but what you do next matters just as much, because you're not just vindicated. You're called. You're not just awakened. You're anointed. And this moment isn't just about closure, it's about commissioning. The remnant is rising. The chosen are being activated. And you, yes, you are one of the leaders of this new era. So walk boldly, speak wisely, love deeply, guard your peace, and above all, never question the truth you carry again, because it's real, it's needed, and now, finally, it's recognized. Chosen one, take a breath. Let it settle into your spirit. You were right to trust what you felt. You were right to follow what you knew. You were right to believe, even when no one else did. Heaven was watching the entire time. Every time you cried alone, every time you stayed silent when you could have fought back, every time you walked away to protect your peace, it was noted, not just in heaven's scrolls, but in your spirit's elevation. You're not here by accident. You're not rising by luck. This is divine timing. This is sacred alignment. And though the journey has been lonely, it has never been empty. You are being poured into so that now you can pour out. The people who once rejected you may never say the words, but their spirit recognizes yours. Your light is undeniable now. Your presence is prophetic, and your peace is proof that God kept you when others left you. So breathe. Chosen one. You don't have to explain anymore. You don't have to convince, just be. Be the light. Be the evidence. Be the walking testimony of what happens when someone chooses obedience over popularity. And as you move forward, remember, you are still protected. You are still guided. You are still anointed. This is your moment. This is your season. And the world is now beginning to see what heaven always knew. So keep shining. Keep rising. Keep trusting. And if this message found you at the perfect moment, subscribe to SoulScripture. Like this video. Share this message with someone who needs it. Leave a comment below with your confirmation. You're not alone in this journey. We're walking it with you. God bless you.